creating truly one-of-one bespoke experiences at scale overall is very tempting, and something I think even before generative AI, any e-commerce company worth their salt was going after. I think once you get into areas where that bespoke experience puts customer trust and loyalty at risk, it puts brand identity not necessarily at risk, but overmodulation of the brand identity, so to speak, at risk. It's like just because you could alter every aspect of an experience one of one and something very bespoke to a customer to get their business, if doing so kind of costs you too much of your own identity as a company, then it's not a good thing.
Welcome to the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives, a podcast by Noibu, where we explore the elite strategies and cutting-edge insights with our expert guests. Get ready to propel your e-commerce business to the next level.
Welcome to the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert's Perspective. Joining us today, we have a SVP from a Fortune 50 retailer. Chris, throughout his long career, not only has worked at Dell, but has been on many boards and even a CEO. Welcome today, Chris Cowger. Really excited to have you on the show.
Thank you, Kailin. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, it wouldn't be a podcast if we didn't start off by talking a little bit about AI. Luckily for Dell and for your business in general, AI and Dell seem to be going together like peanut butter and jam. So why don't we talk a little bit about how AI goes hand in hand with e-com, and what are some of the repercussions over its rapid growth over the last year that you've seen firsthand?
Great question. And as you mentioned, at Dell, we're always happy to talk about AI. And I think for our conversation before the podcast, I feel particularly excited that I'm in a position where I'm leveraging AI to sell AI, which I know a lot of e-commerce counterparts don't have. They're either figuring out how they're going to sell it, or they're trying to figure out how they're going to buy it or how they're going to use it. But I think at Dell, we're in a very unique position where we're kind of covering the entire gamut of AI all at the same time. We're developing and engineering and selling the solutions. We're selling those solutions via e-commerce. We're implementing our own solutions to help drive e-commerce and other experiences. So it's a particularly timely and exciting topic. But in terms of the impact that it has on e-commerce, the only way I know how to describe it really is profound. It's one of the goals of world-class e-commerce is the more you can have a personalized and bespoke experience, obviously, the better you are, the better you'll relate more kind of human to human with your customers, but be able to do that with one-on-one bespoke experiences at scale. That's really kind of tough to do with either traditional AI or ML or more kind of classic personalization technologies. And what the breakthrough of generative AI has really brought then is the ability to kind of massive leaps forward in really all e-commerce companies' ability to hyper-personalize and create these bespoke experiences that speak to their customers one of one in a very, very unique way, and to do so at scale.
I love that. And I'm going to take a hard right here and talk about something that AI can't help with. Obviously, you have vast experience in multiple different industries, different roles. Now you're at a Fortune 50 company. What's one of your constant driving forces or philosophy that's guided you around how you approach leadership and how you build teams? Because we're definitely not at the stage where AI can kind of take over one-on-ones and take over people management and hiring. So maybe give us a bit of your insights as you've looked to really build your teams out at a senior leadership level.
Yeah, happy to. First of all, I'm a strong believer in assembling a strong team with really kind of a focus on, I know it sounds kind of like a cliche, but hiring people smarter than yourself as a way to start. In fact, I'll drop a quote from our beloved founder where I think he said in his second book or his most recent book, whatever number book that was, if you find yourself being the smartest person in the room frequently, then you need to find a new room. And that's really a lot of the reason why ultimately I came back to Dell, because the people that were already here and kind of driving the e-commerce business, whether it was more from the experience side, technology side, et cetera, was very happy to find that very rarely, if ever, was I the smartest person in the room. And so surrounding yourself with smart people is definitely, I think, kind of step one in rounding out a leadership team, or even just a broader cross-functional team if it's not necessarily the one you're leading. But, outside of having that kind of raw intellectual horsepower and great experience all around you, ensuring that you're not the smartest person in the room, I think the other thing we do particularly well on the e-commerce and other sides of the business at Dell is we assemble really, really diverse teams. And I mean diverse much more from the standpoint of backgrounds, experience, and opinion. And so we have a lot of folks that come from a lot of different areas of e-commerce and e-commerce backgrounds on our team. And they really kind of create a very interesting melting pot, whereas we're trying to think about new directions that we want to go, capabilities we want to create on the site, AI based or otherwise. Usually some of the initial brainstorming and ideation sessions can get pretty heated and pretty conflicting because we have such smart people with such strong points of view, but with such diverse backgrounds that we get a lot of ideas and we cover a lot of ground very early on. It creates a little more of a challenge when we're then trying to narrow it down to exactly where we're going to go from a plan of record standpoint. But I think that time we sometimes lose in just kind of vetting through the diversity of backgrounds and opinions that everyone has ultimately ends up being well worth it, because it then usually ends up putting us in a position where the direction is something truly unique that we've never done before at Dell, and that usually in most cases, none of us have seen in the e-commerce industry anywhere else that we've worked prior.
I love that. And I think for big brands with a ton of resources, AI isn't necessarily something that's brand new. I think generative AI is what's bringing AI to a lot of e-com businesses. My next question for you is, when generative AI really started to hit mainstream, how, if any, did that really impact the way that you were looking at e-commerce and the roadmap that you put together moving forward?
Great question. So there was kind of two different approaches that we took. One is there were any number of capabilities and experiences that we've historically struggled with on Dell.com in the past, whether that's product advisor experiences, help me choose experiences, traditional chatbot type experiences, et cetera, where, they weren't necessarily bad, but they were never kind of yield the experience for customers that we ideally wanted. And we were limited more really by the technology than we were the talent of the team or the platforms we had implemented, et cetera. And one thing that was very clear is that any number of these experiences were going to be fundamentally better enabled via generative AI. So we were super excited about that. But where we went through a really interesting period about 18 months ago, though, was we kind of started slicing and dicing our roadmap and looking at, okay, where do we think it would apply? Where can we up level certain capabilities and experiences? And the good news, it had almost universal applicability everywhere. But fast forward a couple more weeks into that journey, what we found is, hey, are we improving these types of capabilities, or are we obviating the need for them altogether? And so fast forward a couple months after that, what we came out with was this notion of, in fact, I remember being in a very senior kind of executive session on AI in the company. And when people were asking me, hey, what does this mean for e-commerce? The quip that I would say I nonchalantly put out there, but I said, you just witnessed the death of traditional shop. Of course, then everyone kind of cocks their head because no one in there really was an e-commerce person. There were different kind of disciplinary senior executives. And what I explained was, I said, this notion of, as we went through each one of these experiences and thought about how AI and generative AI was going to make it better, we really came to the realization that no, it's with a new kind of paradigm around e-commerce and online experience, you don't need that capability anymore. That's kind of taken care of by this higher level subset of experiences and capabilities that we call new site paradigm, which is the notion of people going online, I don't know whether it's a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, and linear click pathing and going through traditional navigation to browse and discover products and learn more about them and all of that. Largely see that overall experience going away and people having much more of a bespoke interaction with a company and its website on a digital canvas is really the way that we kind of think about it going forward. And when you abstract it out that level and say almost take your traditional site and commerce experience and completely throw it aside and think about what one-of-one interactions with customers look like on a much more flexible, dynamic, generative canvas. And what could that be like? Well, then you're throwing your whole roadmap out the door at that point. And so I think that's kind of where our head's at. And that's how profoundly we think commerce changes. But it's not going to get there overnight, as you know, right? The current world and the current thought paradigm and experiential paradigm is going to live on for some period of time while a new one kind of emerges. And so being thoughtful around when is the world ready for a new paradigm? Do you run paradigms in parallel? And everything else is what we're trying to work through. But in short, do we think that paradigm ultimately changes and changes rather profoundly? Absolutely. So our paradigm and approach right now is fundamentally we're rethinking the whole thing.
Perfect. That makes sense. So it sounds like kind of what I'm hearing here, Chris, and obviously Dell's in a unique situation because you guys are very embedded in the AI ecosystem. So leveraging that technology to further your shopping experience is maybe not something that traditional retailers, which is a lot of the online transactions online, would have, right? Let's say you make jeans or luxury items. You probably don't have the engineering team that Dell has just in general, much less working on the engineering team just in general. So some of the tactical things that I heard from you that make a ton of sense to me is, like you said before, the whole chat component. I think there was recently an article from Klarna, which is a payment gateway, and I believe something like 2,000 or 3,000 jobs were repurposed because they were able to automate a ton of the most common. So I think the chatbot makes sense. The personalization also makes sense, probably helping writing the content. A lot of these generative things make a ton of sense. When you're looking at the roadmap of AI, does generative AI help you at all with the supply chain? How do you think about it in terms of that context? Is there any value you think to be generated there?
I think so. And that's one to your earlier comment around, while generative AI may be, kind of a more recent introduction, recent as in, last 18 months or so, AI in general is not, right? It's been around for a while. And I would argue one of the areas where Dell started applying more traditional AI to its business was supply chain going back years and years and years. And so you hit on another opportunity that we're absolutely focused on is adding generative AI to the mix, particularly on the commerce side of the business, allows us to make a very interesting set of connections between the commerce and the operational side of the business, right? And so it's almost like independently we were developing very, very intelligent, optimized front ends and back ends. And not that they didn't communicate, but they fundamentally communicated more through people and what I call offline processes. One of the things that we're looking at much more now is while each one of them is independently very intelligent, how do we more seamlessly connect them, leveraging generative AI to be more intelligent together, right? So why do people forecast when we sell over 95% of everything we sell from software and peripherals and laptops and much more seemingly transactional devices all the way up through full scale data center solutions and everything else? We sell 95% of all of that online. And so at any given point in time, there's no reason that not only can the operations side of our business not only know what we're selling today, but they can have predictive trends of, okay, based on what we've sold in the past day, the past week, the past month, the past quarter, when you look at the change in those trends week over week, month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year, you can start to leverage a lot of those generative AI type technologies to say the website and the e-commerce engine will more or less become the forecast and the demand signal engine for operations. Maybe every once in a while we should have a human being take a look at it to see if there's any areas where on the margin we would want to imply human intelligence. But for whether it's 80, 90, 95% of the time, the front end of the engine should be the one setting the direction for the back end of the engine instead of having imperfect processes and human error and decision making in between. So, like I said, we've been on that path for several years with more traditional AI, and this has kind of been, a real game changer for us to better, more seamlessly connect those two hats.
And as you're saying that, something came to mind. I recently saw something or I read something where they're talking about opportunistic pricing. So, based on the buying intent, even if it's something that you potentially want to discount, maybe that session when there's high buying intent doesn't see a discount. On the flip side of that, let's say that there's high inventory and you have two things that are very similar and there's 10 times the inventory on the one that's $10 more expensive. How do you maybe make that the one that gets discounted down a little bit to even out the inventory? Have you guys thought or played with pricing inventory mixes in terms of how you're pricing your products online relative to what you actually want to get out of the warehouse?
Yeah, I mean, certainly kind of the whole concept of sell what you got on the truck, so to speak, is a big part of the motion. I think, for us, the needle to thread or the fine line is I can think of any number of marketplaces worldwide that have fantastically complex and accurate algorithms that will kind of constantly do that real-time price adjustment to kind of balance out demand and supply. Going that far for us, I don't think makes the most sense. Certainly having that as insight available for the teams that are really driving the merchandising side is very, very helpful. But in our business, trust with customers is very, very important. And constantly changing dynamic pricing on, relatively high value added items can kind of wane on that trust a little bit. And so for us, it's, I think, having real-time intelligence to make sure we're doing the smartest things that we can with our pricing to balance demand, supply, and also, quite frankly, market competitiveness. But at the same time, not doing so to the level where customers are constantly left with a dilemma of seeing prices that are always changing and wondering, hey, am I in a dilemma stage right now? Is this the best price? Is it going to go up? Is it going to go down? That causes a lot of angst and mistrust with customers. And so it's one of those fundamental, can I, should I? Could we do that? Yes, we could. Are we right now? No, because we think that stability and that peace of mind and that customer trust is an important box bounder in the equation. But I think that's a fine line that every company's got to figure out how they want to walk in what edge. I would say the closer you are to a commodity in a marketplace, I think there's probably no better game in town than doing exactly that. The more you're higher value added complex solutions where, pricing stability and customer trust is paramount. Again, it's good to have those signals and have that intelligence, but you need to be very cautious about how you action on it.
So you bring us right to my final question, which is, what do you think something tactically that is very appealing to retailers that they think they can do that they probably shouldn't? And maybe just a bit of context. I don't know if you know this, Chris, but prior to what we're working on now at Noibu, which is error monitoring, I spent 2 years of my life trying to sell a VR shopping platform that got very little traction, right? So sometimes people got to tell you that your baby's ugly, or sometimes what you're working on is just the wrong thing, right?
Yeah. Well, I never turned you down, but I've had a lot of people shop those platforms to me, Kailin. I got to tell you, and each time, I don't know, my curiosity was piqued, but I think I sent everyone packing as well. So that was a tough business to be in, brother.
Oh, it is very low gross margin, and you get kicked out of the retailer by the store associate. So it's perfect. But on that vein, Chris, what do you think is a very tempting application, tactical use of AI? And it might really be what we just chatted about that you think is an absolutely no-go.
Certainly creating truly one-of-one bespoke experiences at scale overall is very tempting, and something I think even before generative AI, any e-commerce company worth their salt was going after. I think once you get into areas where that bespoke experience puts customer trust and loyalty at risk, it puts brand identity not necessarily at risk, but overmodulation of the brand identity, so to speak, at risk. It's like just because you could alter every aspect of an experience one of one and something very bespoke to a customer to get their business, if doing so kind of costs you too much of your own identity as a company, then it's not a good thing, right? And so I was glad when you brought up the pricing one. It's a great can I, should I? You can, and there's probably more margin capture and demand velocity optimization and inventory minimization and all the goodzations that you want with it. But there's consequences and trade-offs that depending on what you're selling and who you're selling it to, you really need to be thoughtful of that. And then more broadly, if you're leveraging generative AI to become such a unique snowflake to everyone that's on your site. I mean, we have over 1 billion visits a year on ours. If I'm 1 billion different things from an identity perspective, depending on who's there, well, then I really have no identity at all, right? And so we really are now kind of in an era where we could change anything, but we really need to think about where to be judicious and where do experiences that could be different need to be the same to establish our identity and establish trust versus, no, these are more the right types of experiences to personalize for customers to stay true to ourselves, but true to ourselves in a way that appeals more to that customer. Hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, Chris, I love that. I think that makes a ton of sense. I think one of the things that I think about is a long time ago, probably 5-6 years ago, I was booking flights with some friends. And because I had visited that website a few times, they'd probably embedded some sort of cookie and my price was like $200-$300 higher than the other person. And then we just figured out that if you go in incognito, it would be the other lower price, right? Because the more you visited, the higher the price. And to your point, that broke a lot of trust. It made me question, like, hey, am I getting rinsed here? So I think you're bang on with that. So
I would say you're being optimized. Is what you're being.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, Chris, this was a phenomenal chat. Really appreciate your time. Very much looking forward to uploading this episode. And yeah, thank you so much for your time today. Very wise words.
I appreciate it. Enjoyed the conversation. Great to see you again.
Thank you.
The Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noibu. To find out more about Noibu and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noibu.com. That's Noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the Ecommerce Toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noibu, thanks for listening.